Hi, second period. The last time we read, Constance had collapsed out in the garden and she's in bed now and the doctor's there. Is Mommy all right? Penny asked, craning her neck to see into the room. Of course not, muttered Alistair, his mouth stuffed with peppermints. That's why Father called the doctor, dummy. Hush, both of you, Molly said. She stroked Penny's hair. Your Mommy will be fine. Dr. Crouch is the best in England, maybe the world. Why, I heard that when Napoleon got his head chopped off, it was the good doctor who stitched it back on. Napoleon was poisoned, Alistair corrected, and that was 30 years ago. Molly eyed the bag of sweets in his plump hand. Perhaps you've had enough of those, she said. Alistair glared at her, chewing like a cow. You're probably right. He spit out a huge glob of sticky peppermint goo. It landed on the floor with a wet plop. He smiled. You should clean that up. Someone might slip. Before Molly could respond, a door slammed behind her. Master Windsor rushed from his wife's room, fists clenched. He marched right past Molly and the children, who had to leap aside to avoid being knocked over. Where's he going in such a rush? Alistair muttered, wiping sticky slobber from his chin. Molly did not answer. Instead, she led them both to their bedrooms and instructed them to wash up for supper. When the children were gone, she went to the front hall. Molly knew where Master Windsor had gone. She had seen the key in his hand. Just as she suspected, the green door at the top of the stairs was open. It sounded like Master Windsor's pacing inside. She could hear his strained voice, something between a shout and a whisper. I said make her well, he demanded. You're not listening. I need a cure. Ointments, medicines, anything. Molly peered into the room. Master Windsor was facing the tree. Souvenirs, shillings, and pennies spilled from the knothole in front of him. The man charged forward and plunged his arm into the hole, digging beneath the coins. Enough is enough. I want, he pounded his fist against the tree trunk, out. He slumped to the floor, burying his face in his hands. I want out. He uttered a moan, his body heaving with tight sobs. Molly watched, unable to look away. She had seen men cry before, but never like this. Bertrand Windsor sounded like a lost child, and perhaps he was just that. She took a careful step into the room. Master Windsor? Molly! Bertrand sprang to his feet, wiping tears from his eyes, awkwardly trying to put himself between Molly and the knothole. I was just talking to myself about affairs regarding... It's all right, sir, she said, sparing him the indignity of going on. I know about the tree. His alarm crumbled into something reasonably resembling defeat. I suppose it was only a matter of time, he sniffed. I was never much good at keeping secrets. Molly knew she was meant to leave, to pretend she hadn't seen her master in this state, but she knew equally well that she was no normal maid. She was no longer the help. She was part of the Windsor story now. She removed a handkerchief from her pocket and offered it to him. You look like you could use it. Thank you, he said, wiping his nose. He ran a hand over his pale, unshaven chin. I must be a dreadful sight. Molly pushed her dark hair from her face. We all are. She offered a kind smile. You're doing everything you can for your wife. Bertrand nodded, looking down. He creased the handkerchief over and again on itself, as if he could fold it into nothing. For a moment Molly thought he had forgotten she was there. It wasn't supposed to be like this, he said finally. I had plans to make something of myself, to prove myself to her. Molly inched nearer. Mistress Windsor told me about how hard you tried to make her comfortable. Is that how she put it? He made a bitter face. Connie insisted she didn't care about being comfortable, but I knew that she did. She deserved more than what a clerk could provide, and I was determined to give it to her. If I couldn't earn the money through honest work, I would do it through speculation. Molly knew that speculation was the sort of gambling men did with imaginary money they did not always have. She stared at the man cowering before her. How many times had she silently defended him, imagined him the victim of a cruel and unloving wife? But now, as Molly thought of Constance unconscious in her bed, she knew who the real victim was. You might have done wrong, sir, but you did it for right reasons, she said, trying to hide the judgment from her voice. But I didn't do it. That's the problem. Markets turned, investments went sour. I had to borrow more and more just to keep creditors at bay. The bank seized my accounts, our home, everything. That's when you came here, to the place where you grew up? I first thought of selling the land, he said, but when I returned to the house and I saw the door, I suddenly remembered everything. How my father's studies brought us here, how he built a house around the tree to keep it secret, and how one night he and my mother, he shook his head, warding off some terrible memory. What happened to him? Molly said softly. He smiled like he hadn't heard her. When I opened this door, I found something else. He held up a single coin. My wish. He clenched his fist around the coin, his expression turning to bitterness. I thought it could save us. You must understand. We had nowhere else to go. Molly did understand. She remembered being alone on the streets with Kip. She had been willing to do anything to get him away from that, including bringing him to the house that her every instinct told her was not safe. She folded her arms, warding off a shudder. How well the tree had known just what Master Windsor had needed, just what she had needed. They had, both of them, come to the tree in desperation, but had they just traded one evil for another? No matter what I do, things only get worse, he said absently. The debts, the loans, it's like an anaconda coiled around me, squeezing tighter and tighter. Molly stared at the thin branch protruding from the wall. It was indeed snake-like. We don't got snakes in Ireland, she said, a thought forming. A good saint chased 'em all off long ago. Bertrand nodded, looking a little confused. I'd heard that. What we do got is lizards. She peered out the window, remembering. Lizards aren't snakes, but they still bite. Worse, they're bad luck in a garden. So folks have an old trick for getting rid of 'em. What you do is wait till just before sundown, when the air's cool but the lizards ain't yet gone into their holes. You take a red-hot rock from the fire and set it in the middle of your garden. The lizards, why, they hate the cold, and they'll come running straight for that rock and curl up right on top of it. Come morning, you'll wake to find 'em still on that rock, their bodies cooked alive. She turned back. You see, the rock saves 'em from the chill, only to kill 'em in their own way. Down the hallway, Molly heard a faint moan. She took a step toward Master Windsor and placed a hand on his shoulder. Sir, what your wife needs isn't jewels or money or even medicine. She nodded toward the open door. She needs the same thing as that lizard, to get out of the cold. She fixed her eyes on him, hoping the meaning of her story might sink in. You're right, he said, you're right. But Molly wasn't sure he had understood her. Bertrand bent down and collected the remaining coins from the floor. He stuffed the money into his pocket. For the doctor, he said apologetically. He lowered his head and retreated into the hall. Molly felt a flood of emotions eddying inside of her, an overwhelming mixture of regret and shame. There was not just things she felt about Master Windsor. They were things she felt about herself. A light lapping of water broke the silence, and Molly caught the familiar smell of salt air. She turned around and saw that the knothole was no longer empty. It was filled with dark water, and floating on the surface was a new letter with her name on it. Molly took a step closer, seeing the careful script written in her mother's loving hand. It bobbed up and down, waiting for her. Chapter 35 is called A Spirited Debate. The mood at supper was grim. Even Alistair, who usually spent his meal happily taunting Penny, was silent. However, when Molly appeared in the hall with Kit behind her, he spoke up. What's he doing here? Now, Alistair, Bertrand said. With all the chaos in the house lately, I could hardly expect Molly to prepare a separate meal for herself and her brother. He'll eat with us tonight. He smiled at Molly. No need to stand on ceremony. Molly led her brother to an empty seat beside Penny. It's very kind of you, sir. She nudged Kip with her foot. Very kind, he repeated, though his attention seemed to be on the platter of steaming mutton on the sideboard, purchased courtesy of Hester's special discount. Quite right, declared Dr. Crouch, tucking a sovereign into his collar, indifferent to the mood of the family. I've always said the only real difference between an Englishman and the most savage foreigner is their place of birth. That and brain size, of course. Just ignore Alistair, Penny whispered, scooting her chair closer to Kip. He has a stomach ache from eating too many chocolates. Okay, I'm going to stop there. I'll be back tomorrow. Have a good day.